Good afternoon and welcome to the Faculty of Engineering. I'm Catherine Blackwell. I'm the Industrial Liaison Manager for the faculty. I have a bit of a confession that I've had nightmares all of last week that I would be doing an empty room here, so I can genuinely say that I am very, very pleased that you're all here today. Could I have a show of hands if you are an industry representative who's already collaborating with us? Could you raise your hand? That is fantastic. Thank you. So much of the research that we're showcasing today is only possible because of the collaborations with you. We're hoping that the breadth and depth of research that we have on display here today will encourage you to think about taking that collaboration even further. If you're not already collaborating with us, you're very welcome too. This event is here to show our technical expertise, our research excellence, and our sheer enthusiasm for tackling challenging problems. And we hope that that demonstrates to you the benefits of working with us. If we do manage to make that case, please do come and speak to me afterwards about how you can go about doing that. I am deliberately wearing a bright pink top to make me easy to spot. Otherwise, there's an industrial liaison office stand at the atrium, and there's colleagues there who'd be very pleased to talk to you about ways of engaging with the faculty. Today is our opportunity to show to you the solutions that we are finding, potentially world-changing solutions to really challenging problems. I'm really excited by the programme we have today, and to be frank, I'm really hoping that you're going to be blown away by what you see and hear. But enough preamble from me. I'm really excited that the first element of our programme today is a cybersecurity panel. I think this is a topic that affects all organisations, including our own, and we have a range of perspectives being shared with us today. So, I'd very much like to welcome our panel members. So we have Awais Rashid, who's Professor of Cybersecurity, shortly joining the University of Bristol. We have Paul Elliott from Cerberus Labs. We have Elisabeth Oswald, who's Professor of Applied Cryptography here at Bristol University. Alex Holmes, Deputy Director of Cybersecurity at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And Jonathan Griffin from HP. And chairing this, we have Martin Sadler, who is the Vice Chancellor's Special Advisor on Industrial Strategy. I hope you have a very interesting and, much more importantly, a really enjoyable afternoon here. Over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. So let's start with some quick intros from people, give a little bit more background. In fact, we'll just run along the list here. Awais, do you want to start and give a little bit about your background and...
So, I work on two main areas. I do a lot of work on security of infrastructures, so critical national infrastructure, industrial control systems, cyber physical systems, Internet of Things, and also quite a lot of work on human aspects of security. I also am fortunate enough at the moment to lead a large effort on addressing the skills gap in cybersecurity that I will come to later on.
Okay, I'm Paul Elliott. I work for a company called Cerberus Labs. We're a small company and we're effectively a specialised security consultancy. We have some very big clients and we help them basically secure their products. We're mainly focusing on edge devices and appliances, so anything from fridges to pay TV systems to automotive, effectively. My particular specialism is more hardware than software. And I should add that Elisabeth is an advisor to the company.
Elisabeth.
Okay, so my name is Elisabeth Oswald. I'm a professor in applied cryptography in the computer science department here at the university. And my main research interest really is what happens if you take cryptography, which is defined mainly in very mathematical terms. What happens if you take this and put it into a real device like a fridge, like your mobile phone, your car key? What happens to the strength of these algorithms if you expose them to the real world where they leak potentially a lot of additional information than what they would in purely mathematical models?
Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Holmes, Deputy Director of Cybersecurity at the Department for Digital and Culture and Media and Sport. My team's role is to ensure every organisation in the UK is secure and resilient to support growth. So we are the prosperity part of cybersecurity rather than the operational technical part, which is the National Cybersecurity Centre.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Griffin. I work for HP Labs. I work since the split in HP. I work for HP Inc. We're the printer and PC and endpoint company. So in HP Labs, our job is to look one step beyond the current set of products, maybe 3 years out to maybe 10 or 15 years out into the future. I work in particular at what we call security management, which in our world is threat management, looking for new ways to protect against malware and attacks, to detect them when they happen, and to recover the system back when something does go wrong.
Thank you. So we're connecting more, we're automating more, we're sharing information more, and pretty much every day of the week you can read a news article to do with Russian trolls, to do with fake news, to do with attackers, to do with some major breach. And I would guess the majority of you have no idea whether cybersecurity is a big problem or a little problem or where in between. So what we're going to try and do is give you a sense of the challenges and what the country is doing to actually face them. So I'll start with Awais. So if you can give us a sense of the entire space in sort of 2 minutes, rapid. I mean, I know this is impossible, but he's very capable. So
Yeah.
give us a picture
Okay.
of just what are we actually facing.
Yeah, I was actually going to start with the line that, you know, if you go and read any major news outlet, you find almost a daily story about a data breach or so on. But the problem is actually much, much bigger than that. Technology and digital technology is all around us. We are embedding it everywhere in our daily lives. It's not just mobile phones, smart watches. We are talking about smart cities, smart infrastructures. There is industrial Internet of Things and you know, autonomous vehicles and all these kind of things. And all this stuff relies on software and hardware and relies on communications, data, but equally, it's not just about data anymore. When, for example, you breach the security of a critical environment like a power plant, it has a direct impact on society. If you breach the security of, say, an autonomous vehicle, it has a direct impact on safety of the people that are involved. So while this is an area that I work in, and hence you would expect me to say this, I actually think the next frontier of cybersecurity is exactly that of large-scale infrastructures which are heavily, or what you may call, hyper-connected. And in this landscape, it's not just about securing communications, integrity or security of the software or hardware. It is also about the fact that the infrastructure is not owned by a single entity. There are multiple stakeholders involved. There are lots of complex boundaries involved. Data and information crosses those boundaries. So the landscape is very, very complex, and we can't simply address it by looking at individual things. Yes, that's very, very important, but we also have to look at the more system-wide issues and how the various things, when they come together, as Elisabeth said earlier, you can do things theoretically, but when they go into the real world, they come into contact with a lot of other constraints from the environment, which has an impact on the security of these things. I think the dovetail of that is, as I alluded to earlier, there is a big skills gap. There are estimates both in the US and the UK that at this particular point in time, there are tens of thousands of skilled people that are needed in this area, and we do not have good ways of actually training people at this particular point in time. There are now a number of certified courses around the UK. There are efforts going on internationally, but we really need to take a step back and ask the fundamental question: what is it that we should be teaching people? At what particular point in their career? It shouldn't come when you've graduated from the university and you go and get your first job. It is all around us, and we really need to stop almost thinking about security as an afterthought and security that is kind of integrated into our day-to-day thinking. There is an interesting project that I'm currently leading. It's called the Cybersecurity Body of Knowledge Project. We're working with a number of academics internationally and also industry, which aims to at least make a start towards it. But I think there is a big skills gap, and both industry and academia have a role to play. I'll stop there.
Let me come to Alex. So most people, I guess, in the audience might have heard of the National Cybersecurity Centre. You don't come from there. You come from a different part of government, digital, culture, media and sport. Perhaps you could explain where DCMS actually fits in the national picture And then, you know, from your point of view, what's the priority here? Pick one priority for us, because
Yes.
there's a lot of things we could talk about. So from a governmental point of view, what is front and centre for something we need to be worrying about today?
Okay, so where we fit into the landscape, I've talked about our objective of ensuring every organisation and their customers are secure and resilient to support growth. The government has said it wants the UK to be the safest place in the world to be and do business online, and we have 5 sub-objectives underneath that. So organisations have the knowledge they need, they have the access to the skills they need, so it's our role to close that skills gap. They have access to goods and services they need, they take the appropriate action, and combine these things support the growth of the UK economy. In terms of priorities, I think the taking action they need to do to protect themselves and their customers is one of what we see as the biggest challenge at the moment. And a lot of the information is out there, the technology is out there that they need to take some of the most basic measures to stop the attacks we're seeing and the threat we're seeing today. But organisations and consumers aren't taking the necessary action. And it's because technology doesn't sort of operate in a nice hypothetical environment, it operates in the real world. And on the consumer side, we are doing some work which we generally think is world leading, other countries say that, which is how can we reduce responsibility on consumers when they're buying Internet of Things products to protect the product, protect themselves and protect the ecosystem. So how can we encourage industry, encourage government, encourage retailers that when an Internet of Things product is sold, it's sold by secure by default, it's secure by design, so we're not introducing more vulnerabilities, we're not putting a responsibility, that burden on consumers to stay protected and secure. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have at the moment, and we're doing some big work on that.
So let me come to the big manufacturer in the room, HP. So what is HP doing? What are you doing to make sure that devices are actually secure and I don't need to worry about my printer or whatever?
The problem is we have so many things to do, but to echo one of your challenges, Alex, one of the first things we're still worrying about these days is if you buy a new device, whether it's a PC or a printer or anything else, just that when you open up the box and take it out and plug it in, doing all the things to make sure that it's basically secure. I don't mean that if you buy a consumer laptop, you're secure against a nation-state attack, but I do mean that you don't have to go through complex rituals to know that the default settings are reasonably secure, and that as you use it for a few years, it keeps itself reasonably up to date without you having to go through, have a complex understanding of security. And we're doing quite a lot of work on that. It's an ongoing problem. A challenge I'm particularly involved in is we track the broad state of malware and attacks that are going on. And it's sort of, well, we've seen a number of big attacks this year with Mirai and WannaCry and NotPetya in particular. And it's sort of shocking when you look at them to see how motivated, how imaginative, and honestly how motivated by money the attackers are these days. We got the Mirai, the code was published for it, so we got it working in our lab. And when we looked in it, there's lots of clever engineering. There was also an SQL customer database where the owner was tracking what customers he had sold, how many sizes of attack to, and for how long, making sure he didn't get scammed by his customers. And I can tell you that hackers don't write database code for fun. They write it only for profit. There's lots of interesting challenges in cybersecurity, but it's clear that these guys are in it for the money, and you could see that in WannaCry as well. Something that was a little bit surprising about WannaCry was how quickly they could put together a very effective attack. I didn't look at the code myself, but my colleagues who examined it tell me the actual engineering in producing WannaCry was a bit rubbish. They just hacked the pieces together and they got a very effective attack. But any of my colleagues in the lab could have told them how to do it better. But still it was terribly effective. So what we're doing is we're looking at trying to come up with defenses which will continue to work even as more and more attacks come along. It's an arms race. But at each stage we're trying to see what are the fundamental techniques and behaviors the attackers use over and over again. So we can take a step in the arms race to protect against those. It won't protect forever, but something that'll take them a long time and a lot of effort to get around, and make those as simple and easy to put in place as we can. I've probably used up my time, haven't I?
No, thanks, Jonathan. So that's what a big company that has lots of its own resource can do. What do other companies do? Paul, perhaps you could explain where your startup fits in the ecosystem.
Okay, I mean, to reflect some of the earlier comments, I mean, there's a huge increase in the number of connected devices. If you look in the appliance market, we're looking at 100 million devices being shipped by 2023, I think, and more than half of those will be smart devices. It's just a small percentage at the moment, but we're seeing a huge amount of connectivity. And up until now, people have been networking various IoT devices together and worrying about the security at the end. So, security is something, it's not something that adds to our bottom line. It's a pain, it's a hindrance, we don't want to do it. Gets left to the end. You find you've got a product ship coming up in a week's time, and you have to worry about securing the device. It doesn't get done, and we've seen a lot of breaches based on really stupid mistakes, people leaving ports open and services running and so on. But because we've had a lot of high publicity breaches now, we see a shift in the mindset. So before, people were thinking of security as a hindrance and just something that got in the way. Now, they're thinking about designing security in from the beginning, which is what they should do. So you should architect the security of a system in from the beginning, from the concept, and not shoehorn it in at the end. And we're actually seeing this mindset shift now. We didn't see it 3 years ago. It's now starting to kick in, and companies are realizing they don't have the skills to do it. It's very complicated. If you make a very small mistake, you can have a massive breach. It's impossible to patch it. And it causes massive damage to the company. And so they're basically looking for people to help them with that. And so where we fit in is we work with big companies, big appliance manufacturers, silicon companies, and generally any company building an embedded system that's connected. So that's what we're doing. I think we might have to change our model in the future as companies become more educated, as they will. But at the moment, we're seeing a growing number of big corporate customers looking for help because there's a massive skills gap, and that's where we fit in.
So Elisabeth, how hard is it? You talked about applied cryptography. How hard is, how messy is the actual real world? How hard is it to secure real devices for real companies that don't really want to spend lots of money or lots of time on doing this?
It is a real challenge. So one of the current projects that I'm involved with is a large European project called Reassure, fittingly, where we look with some large silicon manufacturers, some large integrators in Europe, plus certifiers to sort of look at the processes that people have by which they design products, and also very importantly by which they then certify products, in the sense that, well, you've tried to include security by design, how can you test at the end with some confidence that you've actually met your goals? And I think over the last few weeks we had again a prime example of that. Even large companies with very well equipped, very well educated internal teams could not catch I would say, very dramatic flaw that has been published. I don't know whether people are aware, I shall not name names, but it has turned out in one of the most widely shipped ICs that you would, probably half of you would have in their laptops, which are a fundamental part of the TPM. Somebody overlooked some really serious and really stupid mistake in the prime generation. As an effect, basically everything can be trivially broken. You might as well turn off your full disk encryption. It's just a waste of energy.
I'm not sure that's quite what we should be telling them, is to turn all their security off.
I'm trying to be really provocative. So it is very, very hard to build something securely. To really give good arguments of that it has met a goal is equally challenging than to sort of do the security by design. So this is part of the research that we are doing here to try and find ways to provide more confidence in security assessments and so on.
Let's just try and get specific. What advice would you give companies? One piece of advice for if they're producing consumer IoT or industrial IoT devices, what to pay attention to. I mean, probably a large number of companies in the room are touching these devices one way or another. What would you actually like to see? I'll start with the government view.
Yeah, so I have quite a few things. I'll pick one. So I think it's accepting that when you sell a product or a piece of software, it's going to have flaws in it because humans have been involved in building it and encoding it, and code is always shipped with bugs. So you have to have some way that software can be updated, or that hardware can be updated to fix those bugs after it's been released. And one of the biggest flaws we have seen is just pick WannaCry as a recent example. The thing that solved that problem was updating the software. If you couldn't update that software, the operating system in this case, then it would have been much more widespread. And I think being able to update software is incredibly important.
Okay, Jonathan, what would you pick?
I was going to pick updating software. I would like to emphasize designing it so you can update it is really important. I'd say designing it so you can set it up and configure it securely, easily, is second on that list. Just that you don't have complex buttons to press and that you won't forget to do it.
Okay, Elisabeth, what advice would you give companies doing switching off encryption?
Apart from switching off unnecessary encryption, yeah. Well, if you're somehow forced to implement cryptography somehow yourself from scratch in a product, if you cannot rely on certified APIs or software products of some sort, do not touch cryptography. If you touch it, if you make some modifications which you think make it more efficient, ask an independent cryptographer for advice before you switch it, before you actually ship it. It is extremely dangerous in trying to make things more efficient. Mostly you break the code.
Okay.
Well, in my experience, I'd say if you're designing an edge device, make sure that the chipset that you choose has a hardware root of trust. Because if you haven't got secure hardware, you haven't got secure software and the game's over. So, very simple rule.
Okay. Awais.
So, I don't know. I think I'm going to slightly disagree with some of my colleagues on the panel. And I think I agree that updating and patching and all those things are important. But today's technology is tomorrow's legacy device. And as someone who has worked a lot with devices that are deployed in industrial infrastructures, these things were designed and put in place 30 years ago when there was no connectivity. The world around us changes, right? And people then decided that it would be good to connect them. But there were no security protocols built into the devices. The communication protocols aren't secure. So the key thing is that while updating and patching and all these other things are important, there are things that are beyond our control as developers that effectively shape the context in which the device ends up being. And today's devices that we are developing and deploying, if you buy a smart fridge, you're not going to replace your fridge every year. Okay, you know, and in 10 years' time, what is it going to look like? Okay, and in a number of cases, for example, certainly in critical infrastructure settings, we see that people don't update, okay, because updating breaks things, okay, and it potentially compromises things. So we need to make sure that if we are putting in updates in place, so if one advice is, update mechanisms should be able to not break things. They should be backward compatible. And I think that's a big issue because you have stuff that is running for 30 years and you risk updating it and then breaking everything. So I think the world is very complex in that sense. So all these things are important, but there are factors beyond our organization's control, our policies and whatever that impact what happens.
You've just told us it's hard. You haven't actually told us what we're going to do about it being hard. It's
I think so. I think the fundamental thing is that I go back to something that I said very early on. I think we cannot simply think of a thing on its own. We cannot think of a piece of software or a device on its own. As Elisabeth was saying, you put things out into the real world, it interacts with other things. The real world is becoming even more complex. You put a device into the real world, it is going to interact with lots of things. Okay, and when you've got your various features available on your iPhone or your Android phone, you walk through an environment, already it's interacting with a lot of different devices. And when we are designing things, we need to think about that the environment is no longer static, or we are going to know what the configuration is going to be. The configuration is going to be dynamic. Things are going to be dynamically aggregated. And we really need to think about what our security architectures look like in that kind of environment, and what our sort of, operationalized security policies look like in that kind of environment? I don't mean writing, a few lines of text. No, how do we actually implement these things? I think that's really where the challenge comes. I will throw in another challenge, which is that while there are a number of organizations in this room, and we've heard that there are really good practices going on in terms of securing devices. The thing with app stores and IoT is that it actually leads to a democratization effect. You don't only have large organizations or organizations that care about security, writing software or developing hardware and deploying it to potentially millions of people around the world. You can actually do that. You can sit in your living room in your pajamas and you can write an app and deploy it to potentially millions of people around the world, and it will become potentially a sensation. And that thing then goes on your device. It goes into your organization. It goes to your home, interacts with other devices. Again, all these are really great developments, but the challenges are not just for us to think about what we do at an organizational level. Our society is now doing all these things, and we need to really think about how do we reach out to all those sort of indie developers, and how do we actually, what kind of mechanisms do we need to do to ensure that they are engaging in good security practices?
So I'd like everyone to talk a little bit about that what might seem a far future to many, but of course, driverless cars have crept up on us incredibly quickly, and we now know that you can generate not just fake still photos, but fake videos for fake news, so that you can't distinguish reality from something that's been constructed very easily anymore. We're heading for a very different digital world from the ones that probably pretty much everyone in this room grew up with. None of us are digital natives, no matter how young we are, because the world is moving so rapidly. What do we do to kind of stay on the leading edge of what needs to happen here? Because none of us are going to benefit from all of the huge advantages that an information age can bring about if we can't keep it safe in some sense. So what do we need to do to stay out there in terms of the future? Who wants to start? Jonathan, do you want to?
Okay, I'll pick one topic just because there are so many of those. We have an interest in 3D printing, and it's supposed to democratize manufacturing. The idea is that instead of building things in one great big factory and distributing them across the world, you can spread the 3D printers all over the world. Just send out the powder and they'll be manufactured all sorts of devices close to where people need them and as they need them, which is in principle brilliant. But the challenge for all that is that if you have something as simple as, say, a safety helmet, which is a very natural thing, it seems, to 3D print, there's a standard for those. Here in the UK, there's an ISO standard for them. But the minute you democratize the manufacturing so that the design has been done one place, maybe modified in another country, it's being printed on a different continent entirely at some time in the future, and the powder has been sent goodness knows what distance, you need, when you buy one of these helmets, to know that it's the correct design, that it hasn't been messed about with, that the standard that's printed on it can be traced back to a printer that's been maintained correctly over some number of years, that the powder hasn't been watered down. And so the challenge for us is, how do we trace back all those things in a way, again, that the person buying that relatively cheap item can be sure it's going to protect them when a brick falls on their head, maybe a couple of years later, but again, not in a way that's difficult for the average citizen to do. So we're working on those chains of trust, if you like, but that's a big old challenge, I think, into the future.
I think cybersecurity is one of the things which is going to help us move forward more quickly, and I would say that perhaps. But people often talk about cars and safety, and I always like to use the example of the reason broadly that brakes were invented wasn't to be able to slow cars down, it was so they could go faster. And I think the more we can show that we are building things in a secure and resilient way, and resilience is important as well, I think the more we can develop things more quickly, we can get automated cars, autonomous cars on the roads. UK government is doing things to help that. So within financial technology, fintech sector, regulatory sandboxes where we know that regulation isn't right for how these things advance, but we're not quite sure how things would advance. So we don't want to set regulation too quickly. We want to enable a sort of scientific method to regulation, to test and trial regulation, to see in a way that it actually helps encourage innovation and move things forward as well. And we might look at how we can do that with cybersecurity too.
What do you do with your students, Elisabeth, to encourage them to be the future leaders with these challenges? I mean,
So we have, at least for the computer science students, so they're very well aware of that, but also for other students in principle, we have got an open unit. That's what it's called at Bristol University. That is a unit that anyone can elect to take in their first year, no matter what their background is, and it's called Security 101. And we essentially run through the most important pillars of cybersecurity. We give them an idea about basic cryptography, we give them an idea about authentication, we give them an idea about human aspects, so we get colleagues from the psychology department to come in and explain a bit how humans interact with systems. We look at very specific applications from which I know or hope that the students will find it interesting: mobile phone hacks, Wi-Fi hacking, all of these sort of nice and juicy topics we run through to explain to young people what all the attack vectors are, so that they are not surprised when eventually they go out into the real world to really look in detail at the products that they are helping design.
Paul?
Yeah, well, again, I come back to the skills gap, and I think that a lot of companies, they need expertise, they need to know what best practice is in security, and they need support in that. They need, somebody to help them with that. And a lot of companies aren't there at the moment, hence our business is good. So I probably shouldn't say this, but and I think the UK government has a central role in that, in supporting companies to put that sort of process and expertise in place, and of course universities to provide the people with the skills. So I think the two core elements in getting that process and understanding into companies are the UK government and British universities.
Awais?
So I'm going to slightly digress, and honestly, I have a point. I was at a conference recently, and one presentation I saw, somebody was doing a presentation, and they were talking about a cyber samurai, okay? And it did irk me, and I think that's really where our problem lies, okay? Yes, there is hard stuff, complicated stuff, for which we really need advanced training, the kind of side channel stuff that, for example, people like Elisabeth do, it's not for mere mortals. But equally, we need to bring cybersecurity out of the shadows. We need to make people think that it is something for them. They can actually do it, they can cope with it. It shouldn't be something that they always have to fight against. Going back to my example of people developing software and deploying it to millions of people around the world, it is incredibly hard for you to use a standard cryptographic API. You have to hang upside down, use about 20 different screwdrivers, okay, and need to be able to, count to 1 million or whatever, and then you can do something. And that's complicated, okay? We have designed these kind of APIs for ourselves. We haven't designed them for people who are going to, potentially not have any computer science background, and they're actually going to write software and deploy it to people around the world. It is challenging, and I think we need to do that. We need to make it easier for people to deal with security. Security is something, either it can be invisible, where it doesn't need to be visible, where it's visible, it is integral, and it's easy to do rather than something that you always have to fight against. And at the moment, we are not there yet, and that's what we need to change.
So there are plenty of challenges. What help does the cybersecurity community need from the rest of the industrial world, from the other companies that are not specialists? What do we need people in this room to be doing to help make this work? Who wants to start? Apart from giving you money, Elisabeth, to come solve their problems.
Well, I can start. I think the sort of, again, the best example of that is that one of our students was at a small organization. He went to talk to them about cybersecurity, and they basically said to him, there is nothing of value for us. Nobody cares about us, okay? We don't really need to know about this stuff. They got hacked while he was there. Okay, there couldn't have been a better advertisement. So the point is, we always think that we are not important.
Your students hacking them.
No, luckily not. But it's exactly, over the years I have heard people say, you could publish all our data on the internet, it doesn't really matter, and those kind of things. But no, organizations often are part of complex supply chains. What we do has an impact somewhere down the line. And it's often thinking about cybersecurity is not my problem, is not the way to approach the thing. It's about thinking about ultimately we are all interlinked. And certainly from my own perspective, I can't speak for everyone, but from my own perspective, I do genuinely believe that the really interesting problems in cybersecurity, the real big problems, are interesting problems from an industry perspective, and they're also interesting problems from an academic perspective. And I think that's where a dialogue is particularly useful. Over the years, I have learned great things by talking to people in industry as to what their problems are, and that's how the whole work on industrial control systems was born. Okay, because we just sort of talked to some people and realized, okay, this is like really, really old stuff, okay, and it is interlinked with sort of newer stuff, and it's really complicated, and that's where the whole program of work was born. So I think it's important that you communicate to us what your challenges are.
Could I give a very commercial angle on this just for a moment? And it's procurement. We talk to chief information security officers regularly, and they love our features, the security features we've got, or we'd like to think they do. But then they need to go and talk to their own procurement people, because lots and lots of procurement people are buying on price, and we just need to persuade them to put a value on security. It doesn't have to be the be-all and end-all. Cost matters for everything. These decisions are economic, but we need to work with large and small organizations to say, you need to put a value on security, and we'll happily work with you to show you the value that's there. Don't just buy on cost.
Do you want to get, someone who's been involved with that from government?
Yeah. So I think organisations need to be honest with themselves about their risk around cybersecurity, and I think the less we talk about cybersecurity and more we talk about it in the same way a company will talk about marketing at the board, I think that's when we'll be in a more successful place. Things are never going to be 100% secure, they're never going to be 100% resilient, but the more we can empower our chief information security officers to actually make the right decisions and things aren't just bought on price, the more protected companies will be. If you're also so that's sort of organisations as consumers. I think organisations or companies as part of the ecosystem around cybersecurity, I think the cybersecurity sector isn't going to solve this problem on its own. I think the more we see, talking a bit around how cybersecurity interacts with humans and in the real world, and the more that technology can be built with designers, with sort of social science side of things, the more when we go out and talk to other countries, we talk about UK's world leading when it comes to artificial intelligence and data science and cybersecurity, but also we're unique because we're also leading the world when it comes to design, and it's where those two things interact. We have quite a unique proposition, and I think that's where cybersecurity can sort of embed itself more fully. An example I saw recently was the WhatsApp fake update that was on the Android Google Store. So 1 million people downloaded this update in a few days, and it was just a completely fake update, and it was a complete phishing scam. And we can't blame 1 million people if they download an update in a few days and say, oh, it's your fault, it's the human's fault. The more we design technology in the right way so it can be used by people, and it's not just a cybersecurity problem, it's a cybersecurity and a broader problem, the more we solve it.
Let's, we got time to open up for a few questions. So, anyone in the audience here?
Hi. So we've seen a lot of investment recently in AI and IoT. I think they've actually surpassed fintech in terms of investment in the last year. Why do we not see the same kind of investment in security when arguably there's a better kind of base case for investing in that? Why are we not seeing that level of input?
I think there's probably two sides to that. One is the buzz of AI, and actually a lot of investment that's going into artificial intelligence is investment into cybersecurity. So where we see successful startups in cybersecurity, it's their machine learning algorithms and spotting threats within a system that's actually driving them, making successful. We think the next British unicorn, so $1 billion market cap company, will be Darktrace, which is basically a machine learning company. I think the other side is cybersecurity industry is actually very nascent. It's still quite new, and we have a lot of companies that aren't generating big revenues yet. And I think when researchers see some of those coming through, those rounds going beyond round C, Digital Shadows is another example. I think it will sort of start feeding through, and we'll start getting that feed in. I mean, cybersecurity is a cross-sector industry, and I think it's sort of just further behind AI is the other part.
Paul, do you see the investment, or do you?
Well, yeah, indirectly we see it because the numerous high-profile cases we've had in the last 1 or 2 years have driven a lot of business in our direction. So the money's coming from somewhere, right? They're paying for security, they're thinking about it up front. So companies are for sure investing money, or switched-on companies are investing money in security because they know the cost of a breach. It can be catastrophic. So we do see that in a kind of indirect way. Yeah.
I'd like to pick up on the Digital Shadows thing, just to point out that the people who founded it are all Bristol graduates from the CS department, but it's not exactly a UK success story because they've all had to relocate to California. So how would the panel, given various, the best place to set up a company is either US or Israel, how would you encourage people to stay in the UK?
So they're very definitely still a British company. They've just opened they're the first company to move from level 39 in Canary Wharf into their own office suite in Canary Wharf, actually. There are 150 people based in the UK. What they've done and set up in the United States is they're actually expanded, so they've got some offices over there to keep up with their American expansion.
What about the rest of that? What would you do to keep, if you've got great students, you've got another great startup idea, what would cause you to stay in this area, in Bristol, for example, or in the UK, as opposed to going to California or Israel or somewhere else?
Are you directly asking me?
Well, I'm asking everyone else.
Okay. I think it's hard. As someone who actually did a startup, I think doing a startup in the UK is still quite challenging, and having seen the pace at which things move in the Silicon Valley, certainly in that area, it's just an entirely different landscape. And I think the key thing that would be helpful is it. So again, I'm just speaking from personal experience. It took us a long time to convince people to actually invest in something which was demonstrated, and then it's now doing well. But the problem is that often investors tend to be very, very risk averse on certainly this side of the pond, so to speak. And the second thing is, I think as academics and as researchers, we shouldn't be afraid to fail. You talk to people in the Silicon Valley, they have a few failures as a badge of honor. I did that and it failed, and so on and so forth. And I think it's just we need to really think about things differently. We shouldn't be afraid to fail, and be willing to, from an investment perspective, willing to take a risk, because often those risks do pay off. Some won't, but some will.
Other questions?
Do you see us going down the line of a Dun & Bradstreet equivalent number for security cyber rating that will actually affect companies who can operate with other companies because of their rating? The government have got a sort of cyber essentials plus at a low level. They're making SMEs engage with, to work with, operate with the government. Will that just not follow on to universities?
Perhaps you should tell us when you think that's going to happen, Alex, as opposed to if it will happen.
So you referred to Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials, for start with, is a certificate to show that you've done the very basic things to protect your organisation. So the software is kept up to date, you're managing the network properly. It's sort of, if you haven't got Ian Levy, one of the technical directors in NCSE, says if you're not doing the level of Cyber Essentials, you deserve to be hacked. I wouldn't go as strong as that. But organisations aren't taking the right action, so we're actually just about to commission some research into sort of the metrics of how an organisation can be rated, and it would help the cyber insurance industry as well. And we think that those metrics will sort of help create the market to make more visible how secure and resilient an organisation is. But we're going to do that research to sort of see if it's even a viable idea at the moment. But again, sort of it's scientific method, so it may be a bad idea, but we need to do the research first.
Do the others think it's state-of-the-art is sufficiently stable to put ratings on things? Because whatever you need to do today, you're going to need to do something else tomorrow.
Well, having worked on certification programs in, for various systems like pay TV, they never stay the same. So if you get, if you've got a score of 0 to 5 and you get level 4 today, in 3 years' time it will be level 3, level 2, depending on the new threats that come along. So it's always changing. You can only protect against the threats that you know, and that you may anticipate some threats, but you haven't got a crystal ball, right? You don't know if there's a fundamental flaw in a particular cipher, for example, that you don't know about, that somebody might find in a year's time. So, best practice is you defend against the threats that you know at the moment, and you have to revise these schemes as you go along.
Okay, any more?
We brought up the subject of the digital footprint relative to 3D printing. We call it additive manufacturing in GKM. We recognise that we can't protect everything that we want to transmit. I guess the question we've got is, what do we need to do to assure ourselves that the safety regulations are the backstop? And we pick up on the point of your hard hat, but we can be flying components. We already are flying components in the sky today, and we want to make sure that the safety of people is put first. What do we do to support that?
I'll have a wee go, but I would say this world is still a little bit in the future. And one of the lessons I've learned over a long time working in security and working with malware and attacks is anybody who tries to paint a picture of the future and then declare that they know the security solution for that future, they're wrong on both counts. The future never turns out, the threats never turn out quite as we expect them to be, and the solutions aren't the ones we need. So that's the first thing I'd say. So almost the approach we need is to build this with good security principles that go all the way through the workflows, from design through manufacturing, through distribution with traceability, but also to the printers themselves and the supplies and the people involved. And start from there. Then we can anticipate some threats, and we can use, in particular, good cryptographic techniques against a lot of those, and good traditional secure hardware, secure software techniques. And after that, the next biggest step is to be ready to move fast when the threat environment changes. We can list the threats, and it would be a long list, and we could have a lovely discussion about that we know about now. But I can be sure there'll be new ones we haven't anticipated. And the most important thing really is not to crystallize a system on the assumption that the threat space today will be the same as it is in 2 or 3 years' time. That'll be the general approach.
So just specifically on that for cryptography, I mean, I know cryptographers really worry about the future and how long things will last for. I mean, what is state of the art? I mean, the information that we're securing today, how long do you think before it just becomes broken? So, your Facebook posts out there, whatever, all nicely encrypted somewhere. I mean, how long does that remain safe for, do you think?
You really put me on the spot here. I didn't bring my crystal ball.
Best guess.
My best guess.
If you had to bet your house on it, what would you bet?
Blimey, the stakes are getting high now, really. So, assuming you have used standardized algorithms, the ones that we trust, the ones that we have evaluated, I don't think you should be too worried for the next few years.
Few years.
The word few I'm not going to quantify for much more than that. I mean, there are all sorts of, I suppose, conversations in the wider community about the impact, of course, of quantum computing and stuff like that. But I think we've got many more imminent threats to fear and to understand than the sort of long-term, more long-term problems. But the reality is that we've got a good set of cryptographic algorithms. If you stick to those, and if you do not optimize implementations, you're fine. As soon as you mess around with them, you're not.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up. So if you'd like to thank the panel, and by all means grab them in the time outside afterwards and ask them whatever questions you have about cybersecurity. They are all experts in the field, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to explain stuff to you that may or may not seem quite so easy to understand. So please thank the panel.